Hello, Brenda in Vancouver. How are you?
I'm well, Mark. Thanks.
It is great to meet you, fellow Canadian, fellow McGill alumni. It's
Yeah,
fantastic. I just spoke to another McGill alum in New Zealand, believe it or not.
we tend to get around.
Apparently, I know. And I was fascinated by your story, which we won't get into now, about how France has an advantage over the tuition in McGill, which I want to actually chat with you a little bit more about at some time. But I didn't
Sure.
know I didn't know the French in France had an advantage over fellow Canadian citizens. That's amazing to me. But
Yes.
what can you do? So, could you start by just telling our audience who you are, what you do?
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Brenda Bailey Gershkovitch, and I am the CEO of Silicon Sisters Interactive. And Silicon Sisters is a small studio building video games for women and girls. And it's actually something that's quite unique. And we're, as far as I know, the first female-owned and run video game studio. And I think in the world that I've been able to find out about that we started before a couple of others did, but certainly we're one of a handful. And what we're trying to do is really expand the video game offerings to a much broader audience, and also ensure that games that are available for women and girls are of high quality, which has not always been the case in the past.
That's actually spectacular and pretty unique, rather than just games for the sake of games.
Yeah.
So congratulations. We encounter obviously a lot of women for board positions, senior level positions, etc. And um, I bet you they'd be happy to hear about what you do. So we'll start. Can you give us a sense of, this is a leadership series, and obviously we appreciate you participating. And can you give us I guess the short version of what's your perspective or definition of leadership?
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I did some formal training when I was working on an MBA, and I have a sense of what leadership is in terms of a sort of traditional structure. But I also have my own opinion about leadership, and I think it's a little bit different because I work in the creative industries. And working around incredibly creative people demands a different style of leadership, I've found. And it's really about, creating the tools and the environment and the space that allows that creativity to flow and allows people to really do their best work. And it's a different style of leadership than in my past. For example, before I started my first video game company, I was the regional manager of the Canadian Cancer Society, and I had about 55 reports at the time. And the leadership style that I used there in a fundraising and service provision organization is quite different than the style of leadership I use in the creative industries.
Well, that's interesting because you obviously have an entrepreneurial background. Even for nonprofit, you have to be pretty creative and entrepreneurial. How would you determine what the we use the word right fit so often in our business? How would you determine what the right fit leadership is for an entrepreneur versus, let's say, in a quote unquote regular organization?
Well, my answer to that is by doing it wrong first, which sometimes is the case, isn't it?
Yeah.
In my industry, in video games, we talk about failing fast and failing often. And failing fast is really great advice. And it also, I think, can be really good advice for leaders to try on different styles and be willing to understand if it's not working and make those changes, but do it quickly before people determine really, solid stereotypes or perspectives on who you are. So I'll share with you that when I started in the video game industry, I thought it would be very similar to other industries that I'd worked in, and came to work every day with a suit and expected things to be very structured and use tools. Let me turn that off. Use tools that were really very formal. And I needed to adapt very quickly to the culture of the video game industry and not try to bend it to my will, but do it the other way around and figure out how my leadership style could fit into that industry. So one of the things was immediately, starting to dress like this, a little bit on the funkier side, and giving up the suits, which was hard for me because I'd been wearing suits for a long time. And starting to understand that what the needs of my team were different than what my previous team needed from me, and really being open to figuring out what that was. And one of the things that was really helpful to me is identifying people who were tremendously successful leaders in this industry and really looking at what they were doing and what was working for them. And I think that's always good advice. Figure out who your role models are, understand really why they're your role models, choose them for the right reasons, and see what you can gain from them. And my experience in the video game industry, and I find this particularly interesting as a woman, was that people were so willing to give me their time. They were so generous and so accepting and so interested in my success. I was very grateful for that. And there's a lot of stereotypes that, women entering a very traditional male world won't have that type of support. But my experience from other leaders was quite the opposite.
Well, I know one of the key qualifications that you obviously have, based on what you said, is being able to listen. So,
Yes.
and I know another thing you mentioned about failing. A number of executives have told me over the years saying their best return on investment has been to not fire the person making the mistake, but to make sure they get the return on that mistake for their investment. So,
Isn't it true?
yeah, absolutely. That's great. Whereas, you've dealt with and been on boards too, if I'm not mistaken. Do you
Yes.
see any differentiation there of having a right fit on a board? And there's different types of companies too, and different sizes. A board where you're maybe a member of the board, and even a board where you're looking to maybe join, or they're asking you to join. Have you seen? What's your thoughts on that?
hmm Yeah, I've been on a few different boards, and I'm on a couple of different boards right now. And again, just the impact of leadership style is enormous. And a board that I'm on here in British Columbia is called DigiBC, and it's a board of very accomplished leaders throughout the digital media industries, people who are running pretty significant studios, the Sonys, Microsofts, EA, and so on. And um, we all share a common goal, which is to continue to create an environment in our province that's really beneficial for digital media and to help grow that sector. And yet all of these extremely accomplished leaders with very different styles are working together to achieve that. And I think it's my favorite board because as a more junior member of that board, and my studio is smaller than the giant studios they're running, it's just a chance for huge learning and a lot of sharing. So it's a really interesting board for me.
Well, it sounds like you have the passion that you need to be on a board too.
Yeah, it's important to be passionate. I mean, you always get a few people that don't bring everything to the table, and it's tricky, isn't it? Boards are like that, where you have a mix, and I think a good leader is able to identify what people can give and value it, and take that on, even if it's not perhaps as much as someone next to them.
Yeah, we come across that quite a bit, and the best board members are the ones that want to come prepared, want to know what's going on, and want to participate. Otherwise, why bother, right?
Absolutely, yeah,
Yeah, I'm
absolutely.
with you there. Well, social media obviously has had a huge impact on everything, and
Yeah.
including how we found how it affects businesses and how it impacts even decisions that business owners and leaders make. I've actually said this a couple times to people recently. I had a client that said, I used to be able to have a meeting and bring my people into my office, have a heart to heart about what's going on, right, wrong, and it'd be done. And he told me, now I have a meeting. Before the meeting's over, it's on Twitter, basically.
Yeah.
So, in your experience, British Columbia, Canadian, your industry, big question, I guess, but how has social media, in your mind, impact decisions and actions that leaders take?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. In my industry, people have embraced these technologies very early on. So it's been an interesting time to be in the industry because of how I'm surrounded by early adopters, and
Hmm.
it's things move very, very quickly. These are very technically savvy people, very digitally intelligent people. So it's been a really interesting process watching it. I think that the risk is not necessarily larger in terms of owning your brand and your communication, but it's different. And people who are fearful of social media and feel that it's a threat are generally the ones who are misusing it. Is something that I've noticed. And the reason that I'm such a fan of social media, and I love social media so much, is that I think it's in a larger societal sense, it's driving a democratization of communication, which I think is really powerful.
Right.
But in a business sense, I think what happens is it really propels accountability. And I've seen that happen in a number of different ways. And I think that's always going to be a good thing. You know, the more accountability, the more transparency that you can have within your business, the more respect you're going to have of, you know, both your clients and also your employees. So I think it's a really powerful tool if used in that way. It can also sting us. But, you know, and when it stings, the very best answer is humor. And I've seen people just handle it beautifully, and I've seen people handle it very badly. I think we all saw, you know, was it last week that a hotel was charging people $500? They're fining them if they had a negative post in social media. And, you know, that is just, oh, you see that, you just think, oh my goodness, what were you thinking? And compare that to, you know, one of the tampon companies who people were making fun of, and they did a fantastic response to it in social media, which absolutely compelled their brand forward. So it's been fascinating to watch the pros and cons and how to handle it and how, you know, to desperately mishandle it.
Well, we talked before a little bit about all our parents said was true. You know, I remember my parents used to say, the most important thing is you got to be able to laugh at yourself.
Absolutely.
Probably, and the first time I actually thought about that when you said it in that way, that's what you're talking about, I guess, on social media. We had a restaurant down here, by the way, that started posting bad things about people that that would not show up and not cancel their reservation.
Really? How did
And
that go?
um, it was 50-50 because they understood that they were losing tables. But now there's restaurants down here that are taking prepaid because if you don't show up, you're already paid, which is also kind of interesting. So,
Mm,
but you know, it's. I remember Michael Dell talked about how he didn't want to address things on social media initially, but then he did, and he found that it was double the value of not responding, which was negative. So,
yeah.
um, I know in my business for recruiting, social media has had a big impact. Have you have you noticed? Because I noticed you're involved with a lot of educational type videos as well. Um,
Mhm.
how is that playing out? How is that happening? And for example, I just interviewed the president of a major university on the East Coast talking about using videos and social media. I'm fascinated about how you're using it for education and just life lessons too. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Mhm. Yeah, I'm not hugely involved in the education side of video games. I'm interested in education as a sort of a personal interest, but
Hmm.
you know, I think that social media across the board has been able to really roll out people's messages in a way that's a lot more accessible. And what I've noticed is, you know, younger employees that are coming in are just so much more interested in hearing their content in that way. And it's really about, you know, back in the day I used to be a social worker, and we had a saying which was meet your client, you know, meet them where the client is, you know. And what it meant was, sure, I might be able to, you know, speak in a way that's very educated and makes me sound like I'm very capable, but it also can create a tremendous amount of distance with a client if a client is you know, used to a different type and uses a lot of slang. So we would speak in a manner that was a good fit with the client. And I think that that's really what social media is compelling us to do, is to meet people where they are. And as employers, that's a driver for us. We want to make sure that we're communicating in a way that is the way that people are receiving information. And if we're not doing that, other people are going to be, and we're going to miss out. So I think that's really, really important. You know, for example, on some of the video games that we've made, we have a series called School 26, which is a game designed for younger girls, for preteen girls, and, you know, between the ages of 10 and 16. And our main character, Kate, has had her own Twitter feed for 3 years now. And she's a character, and she tweets regularly. And, you know, we've got many thousands of followers, and she has a Facebook page with 26,000 followers. So it's interesting because, you know, that's not something that I would have immediately thought to do. But we're working with teams. You know, one of the writers on our team is, she was 19 at the time, and said, we've got to make sure that Kate's got her own Twitter feed. I said, okay, let's do it. And it was really successful. So it is about being connected to who your audience is and ensuring that you're communicating, really meeting them where they are, I think is the same idea.
Was my UK friend just said a few minutes ago, brilliant, which is what they say,
Brilliant.
just brilliant. Well, I know you're also a contributor in the community. You were working in nonprofit before, especially for our up and coming leaders. Can you tell how important that is on a person's career, personal growth, etc.?
Absolutely. You know, for me, that's been a huge part of my career, and I think it's given back to me in ways that are far greater than the time and effort that I've made, which is interesting because you don't do it for that reason, and it's not the driver. But boy, is that true. That's absolutely true. And some of the most important business contacts that I've made have been through my social endeavors, my social entrepreneurship, and I think that that's a great thing. People who are really involved in their community and who are business people and connect with each other already share something pretty strong, and it's, you know, that's really important. And also, I think there's something about, and this isn't a fully fledged idea yet, but there's something about the type of passion that it takes to be an entrepreneur and the type of passion it takes to work on causes that are important to you. There's a similarity between those two, and I see a lot of entrepreneurs who have that second piece as well, and it's powerful stuff, you know. A lot of the skills that you develop working with you know, various different causes are the same skills that you can bring into whatever your workplace environment is as well. So I found that to be really helpful. For me, one of the things that is a big driver carries over between my studio and my charity work, and that is that there's been research that's come out and shown that for young people, if they're involved in technology at a young age, if they're playing video games, for example, or you know, using a lot of social media, they're more likely to go into a technological career. And I find that really important because we have a history of building good video games for boys and not very good video games for girls. And then we say, well, girls don't like to game. Well, shocker, when we spend 1/10 of the budget on girls' games and they're really bad and girls don't play games. But it matters. It's not just about, you know, they're missing a most fabulous form of entertainment that I personally have always enjoyed my whole life and I feel badly about. That's not the driver. The driver really for me is that we're creating a world that's more and more technological, and yet we're, you know, not inviting our whole populace in. And that's true for women, but it's also true for people of color. It's also true for people who don't have access to the internet. It's also true, there's a whole bunch of divisions that are part of that more technological world that I think we have to be worried about. So that's not, you know, necessarily the driver for Silicon Sisters, but it is part of what we're trying to do. So one of the things we did when we first started the company was opening the studio up on Friday nights to bring girls in just to see what it looks like to code. What is that about? And one of our coders, Felicity, who's this super cool young woman, and she plays in a punk band, and you just could never meet a cool person than Felicity, you know, would sit down and show these young girls how to code, and it just totally changed their world. It just opened up their whole perspective. So I've been very interested in all kinds of different organizations who are keen on exposing girls in particular to code, but I think all young people need to really be exposed to coding. It's the future, and it's like not having a language, and that language is becoming really important.
Yeah, I know there's some organizations, they have, I don't know if Microsoft or whoever's leading it, but they have these huge coding trainings and whatever for lots of
Yeah,
people to come in and whatnot. And you're right, the amazement in the eyes is, well, knowledge is power, as they say. And
absolutely.
so if we leave people out, it's actually going to cost us more in a lot of ways.
That's
So
right.
you're right on there. So let me ask you then, who has been an influencer in your career and in your life? Can you name a person or two?
Absolutely. One of the people, and they're probably not people who are well known to others, but I'll tell you a little bit about them. When I used to work at the Cancer Society, I recruited an exceptional person who was the head of Alliance, which was a big film company. His name is Leonard Shine, very successful businessman, owns a number of theaters, film theaters here in Vancouver. And his goal was always to keep independent film alive. He was one of the original founders of the Vancouver International Film Festival, and very much a caring, successful, community-minded person, very involved in politics. And I had the benefit of Leonard coming on board as the president, so in a volunteer capacity, the parallel to my role, and he and I worked together. And I really admired how he had structured his life. He'd had a very successful career. He'd made a tremendous amount of money, and he used that to better his community. and he could have gone and, you know, bought a Ferrari or owned multiple houses, or, you know, spent his time sailing in Greece, but he didn't. And I think I can personally see over the 15 years that I've known Leonard the difference that he's made in our community of Vancouver, and I value that so highly. I would be so honored if someone spoke about me in that way. You know, when I'm his age, I think that would be a tremendous success. So I have a huge amount of respect for him. There's a group that I'm involved in. It's called Women in Games International, and there's a couple of gals there who've been trying to, you know, for the last 10 years, really get more and more women into the games industry. And there's a gal there named Chrissy King, who's the best connector I've ever met, and I really admire her ability to, everyone she meets, remember their name, remember their story, connect them with someone else, and just grow networks of people with like-minded interests. And I think that's been a real lesson for me. I think I'm naturally a good connector, but not even close to the scale that this woman operates. So I think that's been another one.
That's awesome. I just spoke to some high school seniors real quick, and I told them they can. They asked me to come in and talk to them about branding and building relationships, and I said they're at a stage right now where they can really have a tremendous opportunity to have relationships all over the world because of the technology we have, positively or negatively. And because that's going to affect them forever. It's going to influence them, affect them forever. So there's so much opportunity there. Do you have you've heard this question before in some ways, a leader you've most admired, past or present, that you'd quote unquote love to have dinner with?
Oh, wow. You know, I had dinner with her, believe it or not. Yeah, that actually happened for me. So really interested in Middle Eastern politics and feminist issues, and there's a woman who was hugely influential for me named Nawala Sadawi, and she's a feminist writer in Egypt who was jailed for her writing, and she's an activist against female circumcision, and she's a doctor. And when I was a young woman, I read everything she wrote. This really pivotal work in 1976, you know, when I was just a child, called The Hidden Face of Eve, and really changed how everyone saw women in the Middle East, and just such an influencer. And she's been recognized by the United Nations. She ran for president of Egypt, and they jailed her. And so I've been a huge admirer of hers, you know, for many years, and actually learned to speak Arabic largely to study her work and so on. And when we were living at Pearson College for a time, we had some budget to bring in speakers, and I had the opportunity to invite her over for dinner and make her very bad Middle Eastern food. So it was wonderful. But again, she's one of these people who through her passion and her drive was able to really change the dialogue in her country, you know, at great personal cost, at huge personal cost.
Absolutely. She's
sort of women in the Middle East, Nelson Mandela. You know, she's an extraordinary woman.
That's spectacular. I have heard of her, and it's people don't understand how much they give up and how much passion they have to do that. So that's a great, unique choice. I'm glad you were able to share that with us. On the lighter side, a couple of quick answer questions. Do you have a favorite sport?
I'm a rower.
Ah.
Yeah, rowing.
All right. Well, that's great for scholarships if you were going back to college. How about favorite movie and or TV show?
Oh, this is tough. Well, I'm a huge Game of Thrones fan. Not anything very unique there. Movies. Let's see. You know, I like the old ones. I really do. I'm a huge. I love Ingrid Bergman. I think she's probably got the most style of any woman that I've ever had the pleasure to observe, and I love her. So I watch a lot of old movies, and I also like Catherine Deneuve. And if you haven't seen the wonderful film The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, you should see it. It's
really?
Have you seen it?
No, I want to.
No. Well, it's unique. If I describe it, it won't sound nearly as wonderful as it is, but the entire thing is done in operetta. It's a song in French, but it's a stunning film from the 60s, so that's probably my favorite film.
I'll check it out. I love indies like that. Do you have a favorite type of music?
Oh, my music interests are very broad. I go to opera a lot. I like symphony. I love rock and roll. I grew up with rock and roll. I went to a good old time rock and roll concert last weekend. And I pretty much like all kinds of music, except I'm not so fond of Western. It's the only one that doesn't really grab me.
How about food?
Despite how handsome Keith Urban is.
Well, it's already taken by Nicole, so what are you going to do? And how
Exactly.
about favorite type of food?
Again, huge range. You've already heard me mention the Middle East. I spent some time there and really fell in love with the food there. So that's probably my favorite type. Not Vancouver's not the best town for that. Montreal was a good town for that.
You got it.
Yeah, I have a pretty broad range of foods that I love. Whenever I go to Montreal, I get to Schwartz's, which is the best smoked meat in the world. Absolutely fantastic.
Stood
Was
in
there a
line.
couple of weeks ago.
Stood in line at 10:30 p.m. with my boys. A couple of summers ago now. For Schwartz's, had a great time, and naturally 10:30, 11, it was packed to the hilt.
Of course.
So
Yeah,
hey, this is fantastic. I guess as they would say in the Middle East, salam or shalom,
exactly. Shalom.
and
Salam.
we hope to see you again real soon.
Great. Well, thank you for your time, Mark. It's been nice speaking with you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks.